Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Flatiron Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. This show is brought to you by Flatiron's Tuning, your source for any aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts. Be sure to check out our store at flatirons.tuning.com and stay tuned with Flatiron's Tuning. Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Flatiron's Tuning Podcast. This is episode number 113, and we've got a guest with us today. We've got Mr. Ryan Douthit here, and you probably recognize him from a bunch of his YouTube videos where Ryan, you're talking about all kinds of different vehicles and cars and trucks and all that sort of thing, driving sports TV. But as we are a Subaru channel, there might be some old school Subaru people that remember you from a former life
Yep.
from a magazine called Subie Sport Magazine,
Yeah, that was a long time
the
ago.
Subaru magazine.
Yeah.
So
And
how
Subie
long
Fest
was
too.
that?
We started the Subie Fest event series before Robert Champion took it over, and then sold it, and then took it back over again because it had gone to hell for a few
Yeah,
for a few years.
yeah. How long ago was that? I was thinking 2006, 2007,
2004 through 2009. That was the
4 to
actual
9.
like print version of the publication.
Okay.
A lot of people aren't. When you look, we're pretty far past that now. A lot of people kind of forget that in 2008 there was a massive economic crash,
Yeah.
and all the advertisers either went out of business or decided not to pay. And that's difficult for a small independent publication.
Sure.
And then even the big corporate sponsors that we have, or advertisers we had in the publication, many of them decided that they would go from net 30 to net 120 or longer, which, again, for a small publication, you might as well, I mean, yes, you should pay eventually, but you might as well not. We don't have that cash. So I do not come from a family of great wealth, and I did not have the padding available. So I thought, it's a good time to maybe look for a seller for the publication, because this is, and even if we survived that one transition, the economics are up and down, up and down, up and down. It was challenging. It was a weird time too, with digital video, gaining traction. I mean, we were doing Google Video back in, when was that? 2005 through 2006. Before that, we hosted it on our own servers with our own players. And then YouTube came along, and Google bought YouTube in 2007, I believe, or late 2006, and we were signed as a production partner with YouTube at the time. I've been very bullish about digital video. I always thought it was really great. I actually went to school for video production in the 90s. We were right at the transition between tape and digital. In edit, the capture devices, there weren't a lot of good digital devices yet. It was mostly still it was digital tape, but it was still tape. Anyway, so I've always been a big fan of digital and being able to go that direction. We had been, of course, prior to Subie Sport was actually Driving Sports Print Magazine initially. It was Driving Sports Magazine for, I think, 2 years before we transitioned it to be a Subaru-only publication. Being in the Pacific Northwest, being a huge fan of rally, it just seemed like a natural thing, because a lot of the issues were kind of going in that direction anyway. And I needed it to basically be a success, and that was a good way of getting a success. Doing general interest, competing against Car and Driver, not successful, again, if you're a small publication. You just don't have resources to do that. So we had to kind of double down on the Subaru stuff, and that was very successful.
And at that time, I mean, Subaru was one of the, if not the hot car or one of the hottest cars in the sport compact arena.
Absolutely. So a little backstory. Back in '98, I had a good year, and I decided I wanted to buy a new car. And so I test drove in Gran Turismo. I think it was version 1 on the PlayStation. I test drove Acura Integra GSR, Mazda Miata, and a Subaru 2.5 RS, which at the time, if you remember, it wasn't until 2002 that we got the WRX. So this is kind of like the hurrah before the big move, when everything started going turbo. But those cars were the greatest, pretty much the greatest non-supercars you could buy at the time. They were all enthusiast, fun to drive. I drove them all in Gran Turismo. I decided all of these cars were ones I'd be interested in. I test drove them IRL, loved them all. At the time, I actually owned a Dodge Neon Sport that I had owned for like 6 months and I hated. And
Sure.
I wanted to trade it in instantly. So I, I went to all the dealers, decided I liked all these cars. The Subaru dealer didn't even want my Neon. They're like, we're not even going to
Mm,
take it as a trade-in. I'm
wow.
like, well, that sucks. Okay, so they're off the list. The Mazda, the Miata, I just didn't really. I was fairly newly married at the time. I was a couple years into being
Hmm.
married, and a Miata, as much as I would love to own one, didn't really make a lot of sense. So I ended up getting the Acura Integra GSR. Funny thing though is I ended up over the next decade owning all of those cars. I ended up buying
Sure.
5RS. I ended up buying several Miatas. Anyway, so good times.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and man, that story of Gran Turismo is for those of a certain age, that's how so many of us got indoctrinated into, what Subaru is and what was kind of like the outward appearance of most Subarus was just that it was a car that was good in the snow. It was very utilitarian. It was not like fun. Didn't really seem it. It didn't scream fun. But
Right.
then to the people that were in the know, you knew that okay, well, if you get the 25 RS or once the WRX landed, you get a WRX. Like this
Yeah.
this is a car that's all about like
It had
driving and
it had it had its own little culture, and it was kind of neat. It was like people in the know knew,
mhm,
like you were into rally. It's almost like it had its own secret passwords. It's like, oh,
yeah,
hey, I guess pre-Petter Solberg. So like, hey, Colin McRae. Oh yeah, I know who Colin McRae is. That kind of a thing. Because of course, rally is just not that big in the States. Even
yeah,
as big as it's ever been, it's still like you talk to your random neighbor, they're going to be like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
right,
And you say Gymkhana with Ken Block, they're like, oh yeah, I saw that video. That was dope. That kind of thing.
yeah, yeah,
Ken knew that early on that rally was big. It was important for his development of his brand,
mm,
but he knew that there was a limited scope that you could do with event coverage. And that's kind of like where we went with because back when we were doing Subie Sport Magazine, driving sports continued to be the brand. We transitioned it to video, and it continued to be the coverage for the U.S. Rally Series stuff because there was
hmm,
no coverage at the time of
right,
it was before launch control. It was before anybody was really producing much. So we would go out there and boy, talk about destroying cameras, gravel in the eyeballs. It was so much
yeah,
fun. Loved it. But there was a finite audience for that type of stuff. Like you even film a crash and it's like, it just didn't get the traction that you need when for these other stuff. And Ken and the Martelli brothers saw that and they did Gymkhana, which really helped kind of like blow up the scene as far as breaking that sport out. Even though it wasn't rally, I mean, anybody into rally knows that Gymkhana wasn't rally, but it brought those cars and those personalities to the masses that I think was really critical for the growth of the sport over time. And
yeah,
that's kind of what we did with driving sports too, where we didn't go into Gymkhana, but we went to a wider audience because you can do this stuff for fun. And anybody who's covered the rally series, I know there's a lot of photographers, video guys out there. It's tough to make money unless you're being sponsored by a corporate partner. I mean, like
hmm,
Patterson, who does the Gymkhana, not the Gymkhana, that does launch control with Subaru. Really good camera guy. I met him early on. He and I basically did, or he basically shot most of. I did some pickups on the first DVD that we gave away for the launch of Subie Sport. So I worked with him for years during the early days of Subie Sport, and he was just, I think, if my memory is correct, he was just starting to get out of covering the events.
hmm,
We didn't have any money in it, so we weren't really spending much on it at that point, and he wasn't getting much money on it, and a lot of people weren't. People were kind of getting burned out because you're just doing this for, just destroying very expensive equipment.
yeah,
And there's a point where you're like, for what? And
yeah,
um, but luckily he was able to to do that deal with Subaru to create launch control. And I think that was critical to the sport long term to be able to do that kind of stuff. And with the growth of like launch control and with just the diversification of cars in general, I enjoy doing Subie Sport Magazine. I did not see it as being a forever publication, mostly because I just wasn't sold on the idea of print being forever. You got to remember, at the time, the internet was very exciting. The internet was everything was going digital. You kind of wanted to say that something like a print publication would be around forever, but you would be laughed at basically at the time if you even thought that. Now we know the two can kind of coexist. There's a lot more of these like boutique style publications. Road and
Mm-hmm.
Track has gone full boutique, at a higher cost. There's a bunch of like Land Rover publications that have actually popped up over the last several years that have done quite well, again, in these niche environments. But at the time, we were like, oh, all print's dead. We're going to digital. So
Yeah.
that was kind of my launching point, I guess, towards digital.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've been doing now.
Did you at that time, because this is the early aughts,
Yeah.
uh, this is also where like video magazines started to become a thing, and maybe this is what you're talking about with the DVD that you gave away with
We
Subie
did,
Sport.
yeah, we had two kind of DVD lives on that because when we launched the publication, we launched with a promo DVD that
Mhm.
you had to like sign up as a founding subscriber to get that DVD, and that covered actually, oh god, the stuff on that disc was so timely. It was D1 before
Mhm.
Drift was over here. There was a D1 competition down in
Mhm.
Cali, and we had some footage of that with the Cusco. No, see that Cusco was a different thing, but there was a Super GT thing,
Mhm.
GT Live, and the
Mhm.
Cusco team came out for that, and it was an incredible time because like nobody knew what was going to be happening. Everybody was excited about all these different things, and things were really exciting at the time. So it was great to be able to capture and to be part of that. But yeah, so we near the end of the print publication, we did transition to a video format. We did at least one full DVD version, but
Mhm.
it was
I
clear
think
that the
I
writing
remember
was
that.
on the wall with YouTube and all these other platforms that, the days of DVD publications were pretty much numbered.
Yeah.
So it was what's a good long-term solution here? And we fumbled a lot. I mean,
Well, and at that time, everything was changing. Like there was not like right now, if like even in the last 5 years, say,
yeah,
if you had a print publication and you wanted to pivot to YouTube,
yeah,
that decision would be obvious. But back then, YouTube was still pretty new. It was like the ability, I mean, heck, internet connections were different then. They were much slower than they are now.
yeah.
Internet access was not quite as widespread as it is now. Heck, I don't think you could do download videos on your phone yet. I think that was
No,
a
it was
little
supposed
further
to
on.
expand the size if you could, and heaven
Yeah.
forbids you try to get your mother or your uncle onto the internet at that point.
Yeah.
It's still a challenge. It would still require technical knowledge,
Yep.
and it was interesting because like we jumped onto YouTube pretty early, like I was saying earlier, and we were promised 50-50 rev split or whatever it was, 60-40, I
Hmm.
can't remember. And by the way, our first signing with them was a stack of papers this thick that we had to actually FedEx back and forth. There was no digital
Wow.
signing at the time because
Hmm.
no attorneys were accepting anything digitally at that time. So I got to find that contract somewhere. I haven't seen it in years.
Man, talk about
Anyway,
like
I'm like, does that
when
still govern what we're doing? I have
when
no,
we have talks about these times, it's like it seems so far, so
it's
long ago,
archaic.
so far in the past. It's like,
But so like
no, that
we went
was a handful
all
of years.
in. I had an agent signed up, and we wanted to do a pilot for Discovery Channel. After doing did a couple years of the YouTube thing, but it
Hmm.
really wasn't making a lot of money because even though we were doing a rev split, there was no rev to split.
Yeah.
So I decided to see if we could take it to broadcast. Had a contact over Discovery Channel. They said that they would look at a spec show.
Mm.
So I produced a show
Hmm.
that for Discovery Channel, and I got an agent, and we did all that stuff. And it wasn't picked up by Discovery, but it was picked up by Red Media in Russia, who were still our friends at the time, and then also
Right.
it was picked up by Ignition Channel in South Africa, which was it's kind of like a speed channel for South
Hmm.
Africa. I got fan mail from South Africa for years. We did, I think, 4 or 5 seasons like that. And then in the meanwhile, YouTube grew up.
Hmm.
So we were still putting clips to our YouTube channel. The first few years, we grew to like 60,000 subscribers, which right now people are like, that's nothing. But I tell
Right.
you, back then we were like the second largest car channel on YouTube before all the what was that podcast? Emil Rensing, and who went to federal prison. He owned a
Hmm.
network that he sold to YouTube. What was it? Is Smoking Tire, Ammo.
Okay.
All those guys came from this original thing.
Oh, I don't remember.
Emil was not a great guy, apparently. I don't know him.
Mm,
But everybody else underneath there, they're still the guys. They're all great guys, and they wrote in on this.
got it.
But like, what was it? Garage 319, I think is what it was called. Anyway, Matt Farah's original show,
Hmm.
and you had Larry, and you had just all these different guys who many of whom I call friends now. So
Mm,
it's really kind of an interesting thing because at the time I was very threatened by the fact that this podcast video network, there's another thing, podcasts,
right.
video podcasts, where we're all going to make a fortune, and that
Right.
didn't work out. They sold into YouTube, and then basically the algorithm was birthed after that, and
Yeah.
yada yada yada. But
Hmm.
somewhere like so, while we're doing our broadcast stuff for years, somewhere along the line, people started making money on YouTube. And I was chatting with a couple friends probably about 5 years ago and talking numbers. And I was like, wait, you're making that on YouTube now? They're like, yeah. It's like, why am I doing broadcasts?
Hmm.
At
Hmm.
the time, we were trying to like sell our next season groups and all this other stuff. And so basically, we went back to YouTube. So it's kind of funny. We've been around on YouTube forever. I think I have about 320,000 subscribers.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of people who have been around shorter period of time with many more subscribers. We kind of came in with our newer generation content a little bit late on the curve, but still pretty good. I'm very happy
Hmm.
with where we're at right now. I love our audience. I love doing the type of reviews that we get to do now. And the algorithm is constantly a thorn in the side of all producers.
Sure.
But
Sure.
it's interesting that it's actually become like, who would have thought that YouTube, not that just that it would be popular, but that it would be one of the most stable and lucrative platforms currently in existence. I mean, a lot of people produce content for Facebook, for the Meta platforms. Twitter wants to get in the game, but nobody's actually offering like any financial incentives that make sense. A lot of
Hmm.
people, like everybody I talk to who is big on YouTube, but also produces for other platforms like Insta or whatever, or TikTok, they're like, well, we do it because it brings in audience or brings
Hmm.
in product placements. We never do it for the money on that platform, which kind of frustrates me. It's like, if you guys are making money from the platform, as far as like TikTok making money from this content, TikTok should
Yeah.
pay for that content. But that's not the way it is. But anyway, so YouTube is still a big thing, which is cool. And we're doing pretty well with that. So
Yeah.
I'm pretty happy with it. We do, a couple million views a month, which would have
Yeah.
totally blew my mind from like, where I was 10 years ago.
It's still pretty mind blowing now. That's pretty
It kind
awesome.
of is. It's a lot of people. My kids, I can tell you, uh, my kids both love it and absolutely rake me over the coals whenever I'm recognized in public while I'm out with
Really.
my family. REI, some gentleman and his wife comes up and he's like, "Hey, I really enjoy your show." And my son's like standing next to me. He almost buckles over laughing. He just
Oh
finds this
no.
so hilarious. He's like, "That's my dad, right? Like, he's just a guy."
Right.
It's like, no, 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 son, just go over there. Go look
Yeah.
at those things. Why, yes. Hi, nice to see you.
Yep. Well, all right. So I want to ask first, because you had s- such a long experience, or a decently long experience in print,
Yeah,
but now you've moved your audience over to this video platform.
yeah.
Do you feel, I mean, it seems like you probably ported a lot of those same followers over, but it seems like your ability to connect with that audience is different in a video medium than it is in a print medium. Or would you say it's more similar?
Well, no, it's definitely different. The nice thing about like the video platform and YouTube specifically is if we have breaking news, we can break news.
Mhm.
With the magazine, the production cycles were so long. Like, I mean, for me, even then, I just like, 30 to 60 days to get something out there and then get it mailed
Wow.
and then it eventually shows up. And it's like, so you had to produce content that was kind of evergreen. And that is, in a way, the one thing that is still true with driving sports. We
Hmm.
still have a lot of like we produce our car shows. A lot of channels will produce, like, say, example, we all fly out to an event and there's a new model being released. Actually, while we're recording this, I think my Grand Highlander from Toyota, it's a new, bigger, more powerful Highlander. I think
Hmm.
that video is launching in like an hour.
Okay. Okay.
But like we go out there, we film one as comprehensive video as we can. Boom, that's it. stem to stern, all the details we can fit into one video with the compressed timeline that we have with that product. Other channels will go out there and they'll do an interview with the engineer. They'll do one video comparing this one versus that one. They'll do another video where it's like, let's just talk about the paint colors. Look at all these paint colors you can get,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, but those things are all very and they'll also put a video out before all the specifications are known, because usually when you
Mm-hmm.
go to these events, there's an embargo on driving impressions or certain specifications like pricing. You can't release that, and they do that so that all journalists can basically
Right.
have time with the vehicle before that information is out. So if you can't make it on day one but you make it on day 5, you're not at
Right.
a loss. Just because your schedule didn't work out, you're not going to get screwed.
And by the same token, then once that embargo date hits, they
Yeah.
get this big blitz of content because
Exactly.
everybody
It's kind
releases
of a
everything all at once.
win-win because the car makers get their big blitz and I actually get time because like we filmed this
Mhm.
review a week ago. There's been some specification changes between when we filmed and when it's come out, and
Wow.
if we needed to, we could have massaged a few things. This video I think came together decently, so we didn't have many changes. But the point I'm saying is that a lot of people will kind of look at YouTube as an immediate communications medium, and that's fine. That's the way their channel is built. If you want to
Mhm.
have the first information but not a complete picture, that's where you can go. With our content, we want you to be able to look at this even 5 years from now and go, I'm considering buying a used 2024 Grand Highlander. I wonder what the first model look like. So you can
Yeah.
go to our video. We give a breakdown of where it compares with the other trims, the one we're testing versus the other trims available, how it competes against other products, what the driving impressions are like, what the off-road is like, all that kind of stuff. We
Mhm.
try to pack as much as we can into a single video. So our video is going to be like 35 minutes long. But even though we might have a long video, I feel like there's a little bit of redundancy because I often will duplicate some stuff in the early walk around with the driving because some people won't watch one or the other.
Mhm.
Like they
Yeah.
just right to driving and just watch that. So there's some critical information like horsepower figures, for example, I'll reiterate. But for
Mhm.
the most part, we try to keep it pretty tight. And so I think that's very much like the magazine perspective that I bring to the table. Also wanting to bring in engineers when I can. Um, bringing in
Yeah.
engineers when I can, dealing with sometimes a simple question like, how does your all-wheel drive system function?
Right.
It requires 5 emails, calls back to Japan or Korea or who knows where,
Yeah.
and answers that go nowhere. And that
Right.
is frustrating.
Yeah.
It seems like a lot of the people in PR just don't know that answer. And that's changed, I think, a little bit. It seemed like back when we were doing Subie Sport, we could get information more precise and we dealt with the engineers a lot more, probably because it was a Subaru
Well,
publication.
and there were some people at Subaru that were in their engineering team, but that understood the enthusiast base and sometimes it's like when you just ask a broad question, how does your all-wheel drive system
Right.
work? Like the engineer's like, well, all right, so first like the earth was hot, then it cooled off, and then there were
Oh, the engineer.
dinosaurs.
When you start to
Yeah,
like break down the big question people always ask is what's the ratio front to rear bias?
yeah,
It's like we want one number. It's
yeah,
like when you talk to the engineers, there is no one number
right.
ever. It's
It
this. Here's the curve, and here's the area in which all of these data points. Sometimes,
yeah,
and you're like, okay, I
yeah.
dumb question, I guess, but
It's
people want to know it.
sometimes it's way too broad or they're just like way too zoomed in on specific aspects. It's hard to like kind of distill something that's like this is technical enough that this is going to answer a lot of the deep questions that people have, but it's not so deep that you're going to have an engineering degree to understand what this guy just said.
Right. And I think that like back in those days, a lot of the people in that middle ground who weren't necessarily the engineers, but were more in like PR or marketing, whatever, had a little broader understanding of the products in which they represented because it wasn't as much turnover. I kind of feel like there is a lot of turnover with certain brands these days.
Sure.
Subaru still does very good with us with getting
Hmm.
us the information we need. Not to say like it's always stellar, but they try, and I like that.
Yeah.
Some manufacturers I've asked 3 or 4 times for the same information, and it just goes to a email black hole, and I never get
Right.
a response.
Well,
And
and
you're like,
would you say that the enthusiast base or the ownership base has gotten more educated over time I mean,
Yeah.
back to these publications. I
Mhm.
mean, I remember. I mean, there's Subie Sport. There was Sport Compact Car.
Dave
There were
Coleman. Everybody
yeah,
read his column.
there were publications that were pretty darn technical. That
Yeah.
like if you like subscribe to say a couple of years of these magazines and you really read a lot of the technical articles, after a year or two, you're actually going to have a pretty reasonable understanding. Like not like you couldn't just jump into an engineering role, but
But
you'd
like one
have.
of
Go ahead.
there was the same issue. Like one of the reasons we started Subie Sport is because the forums, love them, hate them,
Mhm.
they were full of bad information. Like I'm not talking like just mistakes. We're talking like information that was outright going to blow your motor up as
Mhm.
de facto knowledge.
Right.
And it's shocking to me that to this day, it's only gotten worse. Because now you're not just dealing with like, oh, the guys over at this one forum or the guys over at that forum. You're now dealing with all the different platforms and all the misinformation. And it's kind of funny. It's like misinformation about vehicles. Yes, that is a thing.
Hmm.
And a lot of people kind of like, to this day, if I post any review on anything involving a CVT, people are like, CVTs are garbage. They'll blow up immediately and they're awful. And it's
Hmm.
like, well, are we talking about a Nissan Jatco unit? Are we talking about the Subaru chain driven? Are we talking about what Toyota calls a CVT, but is actually a planetary gear set? They're all
Right.
very, very different, yet they clump them all together and it's known information. It is known
Right.
that CVTs are crap. And it's like, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, that's just not accurate.
Well,
Uh,
and
you
then
may
what's
not like
interesting,
them, that's fine.
sure, sure, but that what's interesting is so the forums, yes, I mean they were kind of full of those landmines, and then publication, like you figure there's people that are technical editors that are reading through the stuff. The like there's probably some kind of vetting of this content,
Yes.
and then like early YouTube content, I think that there was people that were making technical content, they were trying to be right, and now we've kind of like video content to a certain extent is starting to flirt with kind of those forum levels of information in certain places.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm not to call him out, but I know Scotty Kilmer is massive, and a lot of people listen to him. And I personally don't have an opinion about his content. I have not watched enough of it to have an opinion, but I
Mm,
will tell you, a lot of people have told me their opinions about Scotty Kilmer.
sure, sure.
For better, like he is perfect and everything he says is awesome. To don't trust a single thing that he says. It's all just inflated for views. And unfortunately, because of the view economy, that's kind of is he a smart businessman or is he trying to be accurate? It's like,
Right.
unfortunately, I have this issue where I kind of have to be as honest and accurate as possible. And that's
Hmm.
not always good. So, like, we just did a review of the new CX-90 from Mazda. And
Hmm.
I kind of was telling myself I wasn't even going to bring it up in this thing because it just sets me off because that is a vehicle that's
Okay.
been great. It has so many just issues and it's expensive.
Hmm.
And it's not the product that I feel like they wanted it. I don't know. They wanted it to be, and I hate to because I mean Dave, who wrote for Sport Compact Car, who I read religiously growing up,
Hmm.
he works over at Mazda in engineering.
Okay.
But it's like that vehicle just frustrates me, and it's mostly
Yeah.
because like everybody says that it's like there's so many journalists who have said that it's absolutely brilliant and wonderful, but I drove it. It is not. It isn't.
Mm.
I dislike so many things about that vehicle. One of which being the constantly telling me that I'm not paying attention when I'm actually legitimately driving both hands on the wheel, looking straight ahead, and it's like
Mm.
you're not paying attention. Like, what's this alert say? Oh, and then now I'm not paying
Now you're
attention.
not paying
Like,
attention. Yes.
gotcha. Um,
Mm.
I don't even remember where I was going with that. What were we
Well,
talking
well, so like just I think that because you're trying to create evergreen content, it
about?
sounds, I mean, from what I've seen and from what I know of you, that whatever you experience when you're testing a car, looking at a car, like that's what you're going to try and
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And
capture
that
and
was to
capture and
my
put
financial
out.
detriment because positive reviews, a lot of people watch our channel first off to experience their vehicle that they already own in a manner driven, seen it. They want to watch it driven in a manner in which they may never drive it, but they also want to understand how that vehicle works if they ever do encounter that situation.
Hmm.
And a lot of people will do it for, and this is true with all car review channels. A lot of people will watch it just to be vindicated that they bought the right
Hmm.
vehicle.
Sure.
So by me doing a negative review of the CX-90, and I am an outlier, most people seem to really love it. I don't know why. I basically tanked my own review
Mm.
because nobody on my channel, at least, people don't want to watch a really negative review, but it's the way it was. And I'm not going to lie about it. And I'm not going to sit there going, I love this thing when I didn't. It has issues.
Hmm.
And the one thing that I want to point to is when the Dodge, you remember the Dodge Dart when it was relaunched like a decade ago?
Oh, yeah, with the really small displacement engine. Yeah.
Yeah, it was the Julia. It was like a bad version of the Julia.
Hmm.
And we were all flown out to Texas. We all did the review. All the buff books said about how wonderful it was. Yet these same publications now 10 years later use it as a punchline because it
Hmm.
sucked. It sucked.
Yeah.
And in our reviews, right, we said, it has some positive aspects, but this manual transmission, like, where did they get this from? It didn't match the power train at all.
Hmm.
And we did that in our review, and our review didn't do as well as it probably could because we didn't like the product. But over the decade that followed, now everybody's like, oh yeah, that car wasn't very good at all. It's like, do you
Yeah.
remember the first few weeks of press? Everybody was gushing over it.
Yeah.
So hopefully the CX90, we're not an outlier forever. Hopefully everybody else catches up once they get past eating the shrimp and drinking the champagne at the
Yeah.
launch.
Well, it's one of those, if you get in the car and I mean, you experience what you experience, and your experience and your perspective that you bring to it is going to be different than somebody else's. But
Yeah.
if you're just documenting what you see, what you think, and what you feel in driving the car, like, it's hard to nitpick with that. I mean, you might get in behind the wheel and disagree with some points, but like,
Yeah.
what you experience is
We
what you
we do try
experience.
to we do try like the first half of the videos are almost always just facts and figures. We cover horsepower, we cover size, can I fit in the back seat, can I not? And it's
Mhm.
always funny when people like will comment, well, that back seat didn't look so bad. It's like my
Mhm.
knees were in my teeth. You're like,
Mhm.
what?
Yeah.
Legitimately, you can see I don't fit. And then they'll be like, well, adults aren't supposed to be back there. Yeah, but I
Right.
can fit in this other product. So it's like even facts and figures. Sometimes people just don't want to hear it, and it's
Sure.
like, okay, that's fine. It's when you're dealing with millions of viewers, it's gonna happen,
Sure. Yeah.
and
So
it
some
doesn't
people can
bug
have
me really that
opinions.
much. I
Yeah.
mean, it doesn't get under my skin. It's something where I constantly muse about it. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. Well, that's an odd take, or
Yeah.
like didn't expect them to react that strongly, but
Right.
whatever. But it doesn't get under my skin. I don't lose sleep over this stuff at all.
Yeah.
YouTube, you have to be kind of a little bit.
Anything on a public forum. I mean, you've just kind of, you got to have
Exactly.
a thick skin. It's just like, I'm putting this out there, and it's going to
I'm
have a life of its own, and I'm willing to just roll with it.
Yeah, I don't do this to go hide under a rock. I mean,
Right.
clearly, I'm an outgoing personality. I mean,
Sure.
if you remember Subie Fest, I was the guy out with a bullhorn talking to 1,000 people,
Right.
yelling at them all day long. So
Yep.
that was fun. I kind of
Yeah.
miss these days in a little bit, but on the other hand, events are hard, man.
A whole different set of challenges. Yeah. So do you think, I mean, YouTube has definitely changed without a question, because you've been a part of it kind of since the onset to this present day. I mean, YouTube is really moving to, I would say, a program nature. It seems like a lot of people, a lot of the big channels are really moving to a programming nature,
Yeah.
whereas before or in the beginning, people were just kind of putting up content because they had something that they wanted to say, they had information that they wanted to share. It wasn't, I don't think it was from as much of a programming mindset kind of, and
It was way more casual
yeah.
earlier on. And the fact that we actually produced like now I look back at some of our old stuff and I'm like, oh, that was pretty rough. But at the time we felt really good about it. But we did put, we were multi-camera back when
Hmm.
a lot of people were just doing like talking in front of a
Yeah.
thing. And so, we put more into it than was really necessary at the time. And I don't think it was to our advantage. But these days, if you start a brand new channel and you put out content that's multi-camera, edited, 20, 30 minutes long, and you can retain those viewers for a third of that time, you will get 100,000 views. You just will.
Hmm.
And that's great. It allows people who want to get into it to be able to do so.
Yeah.
But there's no barrier of entry. If you produce awesome content, you will get the views. Now, the difficult part, and this is what we do that not everybody else can do, is to be able to do that
Consistently.
or twice a week with a skeleton crew.
Yeah.
Back when YouTube was very early. I don't even remember the year, but Subaru was showing. So we were still doing the print magazine, I think. Subaru was showing at SEMA show that Forester that they had done a full STI swap
Hmm.
into. It had the fade paint on it, and we were all invited. Me, a bunch of other publications, Motor Trend, Motor Trend was just getting into doing YouTube video, and they thought, we're really going to do YouTube video, right? We all showed up at Streets of Willow, and we drove the car, and we did our thing. Here's me, one dude, camcorder, and a GoPro, I think, or something like that, or maybe a couple camcorders, I don't know what. And then they showed up with a director, a sound guy, 2 or 3 cameras, talent. I mean, like I saw them show up, and like immediately, there's no way they're making money on this video, because at the time YouTube, I mean, you were stoked if you made $100 off of it. If you did 1 million views, you'd probably make a few $100, but a few $100 isn't going to cover an entire film crew. And that's all they were doing. They didn't have the TV show then. They didn't have all this other stuff. This was their early media stuff. And you look at that and you're like, that's insane. Well, now, like you see somebody show up with all that, and it's totally normal, and it totally makes sense. So YouTube's come so far in that content that is professionally produced is rewarded on the platform. So long as, you can't do with a TV show or a movie, you can do a slow cook first half, you don't have to grab them in that 10 seconds. So that's kind of the one downside is that's why we do that little cold open in front of all the shows and we actually do usually pick some of like the latter, better stuff. Like it used to be for years, it's like, no, I don't want to give away what's going to happen. And I want it to be a big surprise. But now it's like, nope, it's in the first 10 seconds because if you don't, nobody's going to watch that end.
So you've got to have a hook at the beginning.
Yeah, so structurally, it's not as I would love it if it was more captive audience where you could actually do a structured arc throughout, a 3-act with a big finish payoff. I'd love to be able to do that, but you just really can't with YouTube. You have to start big and end big. So
it's a different audience, and it's an audience like, especially now that we're watching it on our phones, and
I know
and the attention spans and like the
I
the
still
way
do
that things
4K. Like we produce everything in 4K 2020. That's a color space. But so we could master for 4K HDR, but we don't bother with the HDR portion because at the end of the day, people like half are. Well, let me rephrase that. Actually, I used to think that most of the people would watch it on their mobile phone, but once YouTube actually started giving specifications on platforms, like half of our viewers, is it quite half? Maybe it's a third. I think it was a third, which is still a massive number. Watch us on their TV.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's great.
There's some stat for. There was some stat that I heard that YouTube apps on TVs are now getting more watch time than like if somebody has a cable app or something like that.
Yeah.
Which is crazy, but I mean it's really starting to replace. It's starting to take the case of broadcast, which is why I think there's so many more people in the space that are starting to think of it from like that recurring programming standpoint versus just something that's a little bit more.
And that's something I've seen over the years because like me and my crew, we've produced shows for other platforms. We did 1 or 2 seasons. Anyway, we did the House of Muscle on Motor Trend. We shot that. We edited the first couple episodes, and then they wanted a local LA editor, so they did the rest. But we shot the whole series. We've been doing stuff now we just did iRock Rehab for Hemmings last year. And we're about to start a couple more series for them as well too. And that's where I get the whole, like, you can produce something. I mean, because like Hemmings' channel is not very big. It's I think it's like 10,000 subs or something like that. But like if you look at the numbers on our iRock Rehab series from last year, every video is like 100 to 200,000 views. It's because it's good content, it's like it's planned. We spent 2 weeks filming the series. We actually had a small, nimble crew, but it was still a crew, and everything was done well. I not to pat myself on the back, but we spent the time to produce content that was work, and they got the results from it, which is good to see. It's nice that we're to this point now with this platform where we can do that. The concern is, of course, at what point are there too many shows that, and will the views drop, or will YouTube at some point cut the cake in the middle and go, these guys like Marquise Brownlee, they get all the views, or Doug DeMuro. It still shocks me how many views Doug gets. Like,
this is the algorithm.
No hate towards Doug. I don't know him, never met him. I've watched 2 of his videos. And I'm like, I can't watch this.
Well, and I
But
mean,
apparently
that's
2 million people or 3 million people do all the time.
yeah,
So
yeah.
clearly it's me.
Well, and that's, I mean, when you're making content, I mean, that's one of the interesting decisions that you have to make. I mean, you guys, you have had a lot of success on this platform. We here have been making videos on this platform since 2016. We have a small audience. We have a very devoted audience, but it's a small audience. I don't think we've ever had anything that went crazy. But at the same time, it's just like what we're doing, the content that we're putting out, it's not structured to go viral or be crazy. We're not making a new gymkhana anything. It's a lot more from a different
Yeah,
standpoint.
informational, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's mostly like you're trying to educate the consumer
yeah.
essentially. Yeah.
Yeah, and just solve problems that we see, let people learn from our experience, help people make sure that they get the right thing, which I think it's good for us. I feel good doing it. People like it, but like we're lucky if we get a few thousand views on a video versus 100,000 or more.
Right.
But it's just as long as there's space for all of that content on the platform, I
Yeah.
think there's something there for everybody. Everybody
And
can find it.
there's something weird about the YouTube effect where it really causes a channel to almost double down on one specific aspect of the
Mhm.
content. We never intended to be like we started out doing sports cars,
Mhm.
and but we just didn't get views there. But it was also because we couldn't slide cars sideways. I personally
Right.
cannot afford to fix or repair or pay the fines.
Yeah.
Whereas some other people, they can do that. And so
Yeah.
they can slide a car all day long if they want, or they have friends who have really nice cars. I did not.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, and then so by being able to produce a certain type of content consistently, the YouTube, as you watch your stats, it kind of pushes you towards a certain audience, which the thing that I love is the fact that I actually really like off-roading. I really like
Hmm.
doing the dirty stuff. And unlike rally, where you're flinging sideways at 100 miles per hour, most of our videos are shot at 10 miles per hour,
Right.
which, yeah, there's still hazards. You still have rocks. You still can break things, but it's kind of more of it's an easier to manage the pitfalls are easier to manage. You
Yeah.
can look at something logically and go, this is going to work or this isn't going to work. You're not crossing your fingers halfway through the slide going,
Yeah.
I think this will work.
It's less by the seat of pants. Like I can take an educated guess. This is going to go well, but it's going to look
Right.
cool and it's
I
going to
mean,
be
and
fun.
clearly it's done well enough where we've, bought acreage to build our own off-road course,
Hmm.
which we have some new roads going in a couple of weeks, which will be nice. Very
Very
stoked about
cool.
that. We're going to add some harder trails. We already have a lot of
Okay.
trails that are almost impossible when it's wet, but almost too easy when it's dry. So
Hmm.
it's kind of one of this like depending on the weather, but they're really good like when it snows. So now we're going to try to add something a little bit more vertical for like Jeep,
Okay.
Wrangler style vehicles and Broncos.
Very cool.
Actually, make it more difficult for them. So
Yeah. All right. Well, so I want to ask, are there a couple of highlights, things that you got to do in all of your time in this industry that you never would have dreamed for 1,000 years you would get to do?
well, I did get to drive the full TT course behind Mark Higgins.
This is at Isle of Man.
Isle of Man, yeah,
Yeah.
Isle of Man TT in between the motorcycles. They threw me into an STI, which is actually literally the STI that Paul Walker drove sideways with the STI logo on the top of it in Fast and the Furious. That's the car I drove across Europe.
Really?
Yeah. And then we brought it to the TT, and in between motorcycle rounds, they had me and a few other journalists get into cars and said, follow Mark. And we're like, he has a
Okay.
world record. How are we supposed to follow that guy? Actually, it
Yeah.
was kind of a funny story about that one. Mark felt that I was falling back behind him just so I could really accelerate. And it's
Mm.
like, he's the world record holder. I don't think he realized how fast he was going through there. So, A, he's really fast, even when he's not trying to go fast.
Yeah.
Uh, B, we were all seriously jet lagged. We flew in the night before. And see, it's a right-hand drive car.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
eh.
So little bit of a learning curve there.
Yeah, exactly. And so you're like going into a corner, like narrow streets, they're all like cheese graters worth of rocks on the side. And you're like, I think I'm not going to miss this shift. I hope I don't blow up the box. And one of the journalists behind me actually did wad up the car he was in.
Oh no.
Passes. Anyway, that's a fun video. I actually managed to shoot a video out of it. And thank goodness the GoPros actually ran the whole circuit, which is great. With the
That's
GoPro,
amazing.
you never really know if they're going to work, but it
Right.
worked in that case. So that's a win. That's actually
It,
kind of a fun video. I kind of like that one.
I'm glad that was at the top of your mind because that's what I wanted to ask you about. That looks like it was just like a crazy experience. Like, yeah, I
It
mean,
was yeah, it was nutty, and I kind of wish I wasn't as jet lagged as it was, and I might have been able to remember it better. I
yeah.
did get a ragging on though for hitting the jump as a jump,
Oh,
which I didn't know. Like basically, Mark said he would put his flashers on when we were getting there. I was so busy like trying to figure out the
yeah.
shifting. At the time, I didn't see the blinkers, and so I come around the corner and it's like, well, down. Apparently, that caused some issues with the future of that vehicle being straight.
Ah,
But anyway, it was already used in a movie. I'm sure it was fine.
there you
That
go.
was fun. So that was really fun. That was probably one of the most incredible things. And then also, actually, another Subaru thing. I got to race in a banger race. This is a video that nobody watched on the channel because nobody has any idea what banger racing is.
Okay.
But they had equipped a 1990s Legacy. You take out all the glass, you then go around a dirt track, and you try to crash everybody else. So,
Okay.
while the whole audience is like getting drunk on beer and eating fish and chips, it is
Yes.
so much fun. It's also an Isle of Man. We did it on a different year than we did that other thing.
Wow.
But that video is there. I think like 3,000 people have watched that video. It's not popular, but I'm really glad I shot it and it was super fun to do.
I bet. That's awesome.
And
Well,
of course, Mark said you should have driven better. I'm like, thanks, Mark.
wow. Man, well, especially if they just brought you guys in cold for that. I mean,
Oh yeah.
that's not a lot of time. And Isle of Man is not a simple road, I don't think, especially
No,
if you've
like
never been.
15 miles, I think, and
Yeah.
it varies between downtown with huge crowds to um, far-flung countryside with in very long straights where you're just pulling all
Yeah.
the way up. So it is extremely varied, and there's also a lot of ups and downs and whoops and lefts and rights, and it's like primitive roads that have been paved. So
Yeah.
you're not dealing with nothing's highway. There's no highways on that
Right.
place, and there's no shoulders. Usually the road goes, and then you have like these brick walls on the
Yeah.
side. And
Yeah.
then after driving it, seeing the guys ride the motorbikes on that thing, I'm like, you have to death is chasing you. Like
Yeah.
that is, and the look on these guys' eyes after they've been racing, like, oh, who's that? Oh, his name is escaping me. Guy, what's his name? Guy. He's one of the best motorcycle racers. He's done the Isle of Man forever. Anyway, I saw him after he
Oh,
won.
Guy Martin.
Guy Martin, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Guy Martin, he just has this haunted look on his face. You don't see it on TV, but like when you're looking at him in person after he's raced, you're like, you made a deal with the devil, didn't you?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the closest thing that we have that we've had some kind of experience with is Pikes Peak and
Mhm.
like because Guy Martin came out and he ran a Pikes Peak and I like that's a guy that like yeah, he would run at Pikes Peak. He would try and
Sure.
rip a motorcycle up a mountain with cliffs and
Sure.
stuff like that. Totally. Yeah.
Now that's
There's
actually my second thing is actually we got to drive STIs in, I think it was 2008. Um, Subaru rented Pikes Peak for us,
wow.
and it was before the top half was paved, but the
Hmm.
bottom half was paved. And we ran up that, and they just basically gave us a car, no helmet, and said, and no co-driver. They're like, you're on your own. A helmet's not going to save you if you crash. So go ahead. It's like
Wow.
most of us were kind of like, because we didn't get, I'd never driven Pikes Peak
Yeah.
before. I had no idea what the course layout was. And that was before you could get it on video games. So
Hmm.
anyway, I felt it is a little bit funny in retrospect after that particular event, because you go back and you read the publications like the big buff books of whoever sent their journalist to do it, and it's like
Hmm.
they might have overwritten exactly their driving ability. Not driving abilities, but like they're like, I hung it out around the corner here, and it's like I was right behind you. You
Yeah.
didn't make anything out.
I
You
tell
were
you,
as terrified as I was.
there's that is a road that like honestly, if you just threw me the keys to a race car and said your entry fee is paid, you're just gonna run this race and be like, here's the keys back, I'm good.
Yeah,
Like
it's terrifying. It really is. It's
there's some spots that are just treacherous, and if it goes
very, you
wrong,
kind
like
of get
that's
lulled because there's some sections where you're like, oh, this is nice, this is easy, and then you like all of a sudden it's like, whoop, oh, that's a really tight turn with nothing. There's nothing.
yeah,
Uh, yeah, I mean, I have to admit, like when I heard that Ken's daughter and was going to be racing. I guess his wife is
hmm
racing also. But when I heard the daughter was like my whole, because I have a daughter too. We're
hmm
the same age actually, and they're like my
yeah,
fatherly instincts are like, what? My daughter is not going to race. Why? Why is she racing? And it's like, oh, wait a second. she's actually a professional racer. It'll be fine.
Yeah, yeah. I
But
think
like,
that's
like, oh,
yeah. If you're a racing driver and you've got the time to prepare, I think you can get yourself into a good mental space where you should be able to go up that mountain. But I suspect from talking to people that I don't think anybody goes 10 tenths on that mountain most of the time or in a lot of places, or they at least know where like, all right,
I
I've got
kind
to
of
leave a little bit on the table just in case something goes pear-shaped.
I was there when Sebastian Loeb did his world record run,
Hmm.
and that I would believe that he was full. I think he only races at 10 tenths, and he makes no
Yeah,
mistakes. So when you don't make mistakes, you can run at 10
yeah,
tenths,
yeah.
and
And
that was
that
pretty
I would agree.
cool. They were measuring the temperature up and down the mountain, and they didn't wait to let him run until all conditions were optimal because
Yeah,
not only did his team want him to get the world record, everybody on the mountain wanted him to get that world record.
yeah.
And that was pretty cool. Like nobody really, it was kind of an argument in the classes who would be second because clearly that car, they spent millions of dollars on tires.
Yeah.
Like they developed tires for that run. It's insane. And that kind of
Yeah.
like that was great to be able to see, to witness and to see the process, how they did that. Even though I got totally rebuffed in my interview. I did interview him and he
Mm.
uh he was kind of like whatever.
Oh yeah. Well,
Immediately turned to this blonde who was from a local news station. He's like, "Would you like to ask me a question?" I'm like,
well,
fine, go ahead, go ahead.
you know what? He's been so successful as a driver. I suspect that he's probably got a little bit of a
I
like
mean,
a
how many
perspective on
questions has he how many times has he been asked the same exact question the exact same way? I mean,
many
I
times.
imagine I would be way worse than him if I was in that same position as he was.
It
I'd
would
be
be
like,
challenging.
oh yeah, yeah, to maintain any humility at all after being such an awesome driver for
Well,
such a long period of time.
yeah, and to be fair, I mean that was an amazing run, and the other one that stands out obviously is the IDR going up. But I mean both of those were just like completely crazy,
Yeah,
um, and fun to watch for sure.
yeah.
All right, well, Ryan, we've talked a lot about stuff. I haven't even asked you about cars yet. I have to ask you about cars at least a little bit before I
Yeah, we
let
got
you
about
go.
5 minutes before I have to go. I
Okay,
have some errands I got to go run.
okay.
I know I totally
So,
dominated. Like I just stopped. Basically, you put a mic in front of me. I keep talking. This is why my videos are all 30 minutes long at a minimum.
okay.
Anyway,
Well, all right. So broad strokes here. You've now got to drive like almost any and all cars that are out there,
yes.
and everything is kind of switching to electric. Everything is pretty much moving to electric. What do you think of this move? Do you think that the manufacturers are doing a good job with it? I mean,
I love electric, but I think there's too much focus on massive range and power. I think that's uh, it's the opposite of what we should be doing with electric. But we do have a lot of constraints with not just supply lines, but also with the current technology and battery range. I think that to this now there's before I say anything about electric, I understand that it's a very wide. Different people need different things. Some people need to
mhm,
tow. Some people need to do multi-state road trips every day, apparently, according to comments on
right.
YouTube, and that's fine. These comments are not for everybody. These comments are in general broad strokes as they apply to the masses, I believe, as I see it.
Okay.
I think that vehicles like the Bolt are the best way to go for an electric car at this point. I'm really disappointed actually that it was discontinued because the range, the features, and the price, that is
Hmm.
the way that you actually change things. If you want to be able to cut down on emissions, you need to have mass adoption. You can't have Hummer
Yeah.
HT or whatever the heck that one's called, H1. Anyway,
Which one?
those
Yeah.
big
Sure.
Hummer EVs, stupid. I love driving it. I do want to say that. It was like driving a grown up Tonka truck in the best way, but it is a stupid truck. It's like, it's 10,000 pounds on
Yeah.
the road. Um, so we're about 5 years away, maybe 3 to 5 years of some new battery tech. Solid state batteries are coming
Hmm.
out. That'll reduce. I mean, it would be nice to say that it'll reduce it by 50%. It'll probably be closer to 25% reduction, but still keeping the same range. Right now, they're just having issues with them blowing up, but they'll get that solved. And I think when we see that, I really hope that they don't just use that to expand range. So we now have like 800 miles cars, but
Right.
but instead we see more of the smaller, lighter vehicles that make a lot of sense. The
Yeah.
Plaid, for example, Tesla Plaid, nobody needs that. I mean, I hate to say it. If you want a fast car, get something that at least corners fun, and it
Yeah.
has, and it has noise and is, I don't know. It's like, I just don't see electric cars as replacing the all-encompassing, like the Lotuses of the world. You
Right.
can technically, and yes, you'll be very fast in the straight lines, even in some of the corners, depending on their equipment. I totally get this, but I just feel like we need that mass adoption across the board of vehicles that make a lot more sense than these niche, super expensive, ridiculously fast vehicles. Love them, but we just don't need them.
Do you,
Um,
do you think that I mean, they've reset the bar for performance because it's so easy to make an electric car that has
0 to 60 is
1,000
meaningless.
horsepower?
It's
Yeah.
meaningless. I still do it in the reviews because between hybrids and gas cars, we can still kind of measure like how quick something is. But in general, I mean, like 0 to 60 with an electric car, and it's the exact same 0 to 60 every single time. Gas
Right.
cars don't do that. So
Right.
again, they're
But
so
have
fast.
but have they gone too fast? Do you think
I don't think
like
they're too fast because I don't think a
oh,
lot of people do that. A lot of people don't
mm,
do the full pedal down. And a lot of these vehicles have all-wheel drive. You have traction control. If we were still, 20 years ago where traction control was optional, I would absolutely say they were dangerous and need to pull off the road. But I just don't really feel like there's no actual data. I should pause there a moment and say I don't actually know of data. Maybe there is data. I
okay.
haven't seen any data that shows that vehicles are crashing because of that. They're crashing because of people being too reliant on their
The self-driving.
adaptive cruise,
Yeah.
poorly named. Full self-driving is not full self-driving, is actually L2. But
Right.
that's the big issue right now is people overselling, and unfortunately the government agencies that police that are underfunded and can't seem to do anything about it. Like, how have they been able to sell something called full self-driving that even they admit is not full self-driving for
Right.
so long? It's like, are you serious? Like, in the automotive world, we all knew that it wasn't full self-driving. I mean,
Right.
especially now they do it camera only, which just doesn't seem like a great idea. I love those technologies, but I think positioning them as a replacement, once you start seeing, once you start hearing about like these videos posted up of people like reading books and
Yeah.
playing video games, heck, even like maybe shooting porn in a in a full self-driving car, you're like, well, maybe that's not a good idea. Maybe we should like do something about that. But
Well,
I think that's the biggest issue is right now is safety tech being oversold and people who are distracted while driving, leaning too heavily into that. And that's not just Tesla. That's pretty much all of them.
right.
But I don't know the answer to that because I hate the ones that monitor your face.
Right.
And so it's like, it's a tough answer. It's a tough thing to answer. I will say my daughter just went through driver's ed and they covered it extensively.
Wow.
Distracted driving is a big deal. And here in this state, I don't know how it is in the rest of the country, but in Washington State, she had to do a month of 3 classes, 3 2-hour classes a week for a month
Wow.
to be able to drive before she's 18.
Okay.
And then now she has her driver's permit. She can't actually drive by herself until she logs 50 hours of drive time, or 6 months, or you turn 18, one or the other. So
Right.
she'll practically be 18 at this point before she ends up driving. But
Which is probably a good thing. Like
I
as
remember
a
when I
father of a
was
daughter, I get
16,
that.
I mean, thank God I only drove a 1978 Civic with like 50 horsepower because heaven
Yeah,
knows what kind of issues I would have had if I actually
for
had a
sure.
lot of horsepower. And maybe that's actually something, kids borrowing their super fast parents' electric cars, or even their parents giving them an electric car. That is something to probably be considered. I don't think it's a big enough numbers to really matter yet because not a lot of parents are buying their kids, $50,000 electric cars. But
Right.
you can imagine in 5 6 years when these vehicles have like, 80% of battery capacity still, and they're just not worth a lot on the used market. Some kids are going to be driving some really fast Ionic 5s.
For sure.
And the
Oh
Ionic 5
man.
pretty darn fast. I mean,
Yeah.
for a vehicle.
Yeah.
So yeah, and for me right now, like for off-roading and all that kind of stuff, there's the Rivian, which is good, but I just I can't recommend people to spend money on a company that has like two vehicles, one and a half vehicles, because you can't even really order like the sedan, the
SUV.
the SUV is
Yeah.
still back ordered. It's like one and a half vehicles does not make a product line that guarantees to me that you will still be around. Ford, they'll be around.
Right.
Chevy, they'll be around. Even Tesla will be around, whether they're sucked up by somebody else
Yep.
or a shadow of their place, or of who they once were, or if they're big or whatever, but they will be around at some
Right.
capacity. Rivian, they haven't sold me on it. I would be shocked if Rivian doesn't look at their commercial, if their commercial stuff, because I'm not sure if everybody knows, but they produce electric delivery vans for Amazon as
Yeah.
well as other. They run around in our neighborhood all the time. So we see them all the time, but I'm not sure
Mhm.
where it is, how it is with the rest of the country. But if they find that it's more lucrative to have one client that buys 200,000 of your products versus trying to deal with all the individual clients, customers who buy individually, maybe they'll decide they just want to go commercial. I don't know. They're too small of a company, and that future isn't written yet.
It's too
Um,
early to tell.
it is way too early to
Yeah.
tell. I mean, they could pull an international and go like, yeah, consumer space was fun, but we make more money over here.
Yeah.
And then, as a consumer, you're left holding the bag. And yeah, it's somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Don't buy their vehicles because they may not be around. But as a consumer, that's our
Right.
prerogative. We can
Right.
do that.
Sure. Sure. It's definitely something to think about with all these new electric cars just popping up. Like that's
Exactly.
something to consider.
Yeah,
All
exactly.
right. So Ryan, I know you got to go soon. I have one more question that I have to ask.
Okay.
With Subaru now saying that they're going to now put a lot of energy into moving into an EV platform,
Yep.
do you like this move? Do you think it's too late? Do you think they should look at other avenues? What is
My
your
only
thought about it?
concern is that they partner too strongly. And I've seen this with Honda as well too, where they basically, to get a leg up, they kind of partner with another manufacturer, and in
Hmm.
doing so, they kind of lose their personality.
Yep.
The BZ4X is poorly named as it is, and the Solterra. I actually kind of like them, and I think that they're actually right sized for most people. But for a vehicle company like Subaru, who they have this image of, you can get into your car and you can go drive across a mountain, and
Hmm.
you will love your Subaru and you will love the mountain equally. That whole kind of attitude. It's
Yeah.
a difficult sell to say you can go to a mountain, but only if it's 100 miles away, because there's no charging out there and you're not going to get back alive if you try to go over that distance. Ah, I think Subaru's kind of written themselves into a corner a little bit here with this whole thing, with their whole marketing, and then also trying to transition to electric. Also, they haven't really, I don't know what they're doing behind the scenes, because nobody seems to know what they're doing behind the scenes, but it
Hmm.
doesn't seem like they've been focusing a lot on electric development. So in that jump starting of the electric game, I hope they don't lose their personality and the touch that makes Subaru a Subaru. Um,
Yeah.
I do like the fact that they developed the all-wheel drive system on the BZ4X/Solterra, and it does work pretty well. I'd be totally happy seeing more of that. The design on that vehicle doesn't really do much for me. But I think it's kind of like focusing on that type of product, although it does kind of have the sniff of a compliance vehicle. They need to produce X number of electrics, so here you guys go. Uh,
It's a
I
good
want
start. It
it's a good start with a limited audience, and I
right.
think that they're heading in the right direction. Subaru is such a slow-moving conservative company. I just hope they can move fast enough without losing their identity, and
Yeah.
that's going to be the tricky thing for them.
That's I totally agree. That's the key is they've got to if it's a Subaru electric car, you have to get into it and drive it and know and feel that it's a Subaru and not think that it feels too much like every other electric car that you've test driven before that.
Yeah, you'll know they're fully committed when they come out with a electric Forester or a plug-in electric Forester. At that point, you'll be like, oh, okay, they're in, because
Hmm.
the Forester is like, it's
The bread and butter.
yeah, it's bread and butter for them.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, 2028 now is they're saying is when the electric STI is going to come out. So if nothing before then, like
These
that will
things,
be
I
kind
can
of
guarantee nobody from inside Subaru has said that.
okay. Well, that's probably fair. Let's hope let's hope that it comes out and let's hope it actually comes out sooner because that's a
Yeah,
long time. I don't know if anybody,
yes.
how many people are going to wait from 2021 to 2028 for the next STI, but
And what will everybody else have by then?
right.
It's like
Flying
it's
cars. We're
flying
going to have
car.
flying electric cars by that point.
Sign me up.
Yes. Cool. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for chatting with us. Really appreciate it.
It's
Again,
fun.
yes, Driving Sports TV, and thanks for watching. Thanks for your support. Until next time, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.
See ya.
Thanks everyone for tuning in to the Flatiron Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. Once again, we'd like to let you know that your support is what makes this show possible. Be sure to check out our online store at flatironstuning.com for any of your aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts needs. And as always, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.